Continuation of The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Chapter 10. Sybil Takes Her Life. Lord Henry explains that as Sybil was leaving the theater with her mother, she claimed to have forgotten something in her dressing room. When she didn't come back down, the stage manager went to get her. He found her laying dead on the floor. She had swallowed some poison and died instantly. "I have murdered Sybil Vane," Dorian said, hanging his head in shame. "Murdered her as surely as if I had cut her little throat with a knife." Lord Henry consoled his friend, insisting that Sybil was an overly romantic girl who had taken her own life. No one was to blame, he said. Dorian listened to Lord Henry's words. He felt the time had come to make up his own mind, or had the choice already been made? Life itself had decided for him. Eternal youth, passion, wild joys, and wilder sins. These things would be his. "Oh, Harry, how I loved her once. It seems years ago to me now. She was everything to me. Now came that dreadful night. Was it really only last night? When she acted so badly, and my heart broke. She explained it all to me, but I wasn't moved a bit. I thought Sybil was shallow. Then something happened that made me afraid. I can't tell you what it was," he said, thinking about the strange painting. "But it decided for me. I would go back to Sybil." Lord Henry listened to his friend without speaking. He found that this event was a dramatic interlude at best. In truth, he cared only for Dorian's reputation. "Harry," cried Dorian Gray, coming over and sitting beside him, "I don't feel this tragedy. Am I heartless?" "No, you're only very young and very romantic. In time you will recover. Come with me to the opera tonight. It will help you forget," Lord Henry consoled. Dorian quickly accepted the invitation. He vowed not to think about Sybil again. To Dorian, his own happiness would be all that mattered. He would quickly forget about the dead Sybil Vane. "You have helped me through a bad time, Harry. I wonder what life has in store for me now," he said. "Life has everything in store for you, Dorian. There is nothing that you, with your extraordinary good looks, your charm, and your resources, will not be able to do." Strong words, yet a feeling of pain crept over Dorian as he thought of the desecration in store for his portrait. Now it would become a monster. The shame of it all would have to be hidden away. For a moment he thought of praying that the horrible connection that existed between him and the picture might end. It had changed in answer to a prayer. Perhaps a new prayer might undo the old one. But Dorian did not pray. He could not give up the chance to remain forever young. This portrait would be the most magical of mirrors. If only he hadn't been so foolish and so vain. His life would never be the same. Chapter 11. Basil almost discovers the dreadful secret. The next day Basil Hallward came to see Dorian. He wanted to offer his sympathy about Sybil's death. He also wanted to ask his friend if he would let him exhibit his portrait in a Paris gallery. Dorian was eating lunch when Basil was shown into the room. "I read of Sybil in the late edition of the Globe. I picked up at my club. I came here at once," said Basil. "I can't tell you how sorry I am. I know you must feel terrible. Did you go down and see the girl's mother?" "Of course not," murmured Dorian Gray as he sipped yellow wine from a Venetian glass and looked bored. "I was at the opera." "You went to the opera?" exclaimed Basil, shocked at Dorian's callous behavior. "You went to the opera while Sybil Vane lay dead?" "Stop talking about it," cried Dorian. "What is past is past." "You call yesterday the past?" asked his horrified friend. "Dorian, this is horrible. Something has changed in you completely. You talk as if you had no heart, no pity." "It is all Harry's bad influence." Dorian brushed away Basil's words with a wave of his hand. I don't want to be at the mercy of my emotions. A man who is master of himself can end a sorrow as easily as he can invent a pleasure. I want you to draw me a picture of Sibyl. I should like to have something to remember her by." "All right," Basil agreed, "if it would please you, but you must then do something for me. Please come to my studio and sit for another portrait." "I can never sit for you again, Basil. It is impossible," Dorian swore angrily. The painter stared at him. "Don't be ridiculous. Don't you like the painting I did for you?" Basil asked. "Why have you pulled the screen in front of it? It is the best picture I have ever done. It is disgraceful of you to hide my work away." "The light was too strong on the portrait," Dorian hastily explained. "Too strong? Surely not. It's a great place to hang it. Let me see it." Basil walked towards the corner of the room. A cry of terror broke from Dorian's lips, and he rushed towards the painter and the screen. "You must not look at it." "Why shouldn't I look at it?" asked Basil, laughing. "If you try to look at it, Basil, on my word of honor, I will never speak to you again. I'm very serious." Basil was thunderstruck, and he looked at Dorian in absolute amazement. He had never seen him like this before. Dorian was actually pale with rage. His hands were clenched, and he was shaking all over. "I won't look at it if you don't want me to," he said coldly, turning on his heel and going over towards the window. "But really, it's strange I'm not allowed to see my own work, especially as I am going to exhibit it in Paris in the fall." "To exhibit it? You want to exhibit it?" exclaimed Dorian, a great sense of fear creeping over him. Was the world going to be shown his secret? "Why should you object?" asked Basil. "If you keep it behind a screen, you must not like it very much." Dorian Gray passed his hand over his forehead. There were beads of sweat there. He felt that he was on the brink of a terrible danger. "You can't have forgotten that you assured me that you wouldn't exhibit the painting," cried Dorian. Then he remembered that Lord Henry had said that to him once, half-jokingly, that he should ask Basil why he would not exhibit Dorian's portrait before. "Basil," he said, looking his friend in the eye, "what was your reason for refusing to exhibit my picture before now?" The painter shuddered in spite of himself. "Dorian, if I told you, you would laugh at me. If you don't want me to see your picture, I won't ask again. Your friendship is more important to me than the painting." "No, Basil, you must tell me," insisted Dorian. "I have a right to know." He was determined to find out Basil Hallward's mystery. "Sit down, Dorian," said the painter, looking troubled. "And just answer me one question. Have you noticed something curious in the painting? Something that didn't strike you, but was later revealed to you?" "Basil!" screamed Dorian, clutching the arms of his chair and staring at him with wild eyes. "I see you did. Don't speak," replied Basil. "Your personality had the most extraordinary influence over me. One day, a fatal day, I think, I decided to paint a portrait of you as you are. Whether it was the realism of method or the wonder of your personality, something happened. I worked very hard, and it was a great success, but I had put too much of myself into it. My praise for you was too great, so I decided not to allow the picture to be exhibited." Basil continued. "It is amazing to me, Dorian, that you should have seen this in the portrait." "I saw something," the young man answered very slowly. "Something that seemed curious." "Well, then," said Basil, relieved, "you won't mind, then, if I exhibit the work." "Never," growled Dorian. Basil decided not to argue with his friend, and agreed to his odd request. "It's your decision, and I respect it, Dorian. Goodbye for now. You have been the one person in my life who has really influenced my art." Basil picked up his hat and coat and turned to his friend. "You will sit for me again?" he asked. "Impossible," Dorian said. I can't explain it to you, Basil, but I must never sit for you again. There is something fatal about a portrait. It has a life of its own." He bid Basil good-bye and closed the door. Suddenly Dorian Gray smiled to himself. He had succeeded in fooling his friend. Basil would never learn the truth about the awful portrait. Still he grew worried. The portrait must be hidden away at all costs. He could not run such a risk of discovery again. Chapter 12. An Evil Book Changes Everything. The day after Sybil's death, Dorian decided to hide his tortured painting. What if someone else should see it? What would they think? He ordered his servant to take the painting to the 3rd floor of his townhouse and store it in his old playroom. His trusted servant was given strict orders. No one was allowed to enter the room. Only Dorian had the key to unlock this thick wooden door. There he thought his dreadful secret would be safe from the world. As the door closed, Dorian put the key in his pocket and looked at the room that would house his secret. His eyes fell on a large 17th-century purple satin cover his grandfather had found in a convent in Italy. Yes, that would serve to wrap the dreadful painting. It had often wrapped the dead. Now it would hide something that had a corruption of its own. Worse than the corruption of death. Something that would breed horrors but would never die. He turned, locked the door, and went downstairs to his sitting room. He picked up the St. James Gazette. The newspaper was full of reports of Sybil's death. Fortunately for Dorian, his name was never mentioned. Relieved that he had avoided any bad publicity, Dorian was once more determined to think only of his own pleasure in the future. It was just about 5 o'clock when the doorbell rang. A messenger had a package from Lord Henry. To cheer Dorian up, Lord Henry had sent him a yellow book. It was the strangest little book Dorian had ever read in his life. It chronicled all the sins of the world. The novel had no plot and only one character, a young Parisian man who spent his life trying to realize in the 19th century all the passions of every century before his own. It was a book of evil. But Dorian was so fascinated that he could not stop reading. For years to come, Dorian Gray would never free himself from the influence of this evil book. He never even tried. Instead, he ordered no less than 9 large paper copies of the first edition from Paris. He had them bound in different colors, so they might suit his moods. The hero, a young Parisian in whom the romantic and scientific temperaments blended, very much resembled Dorian Gray. The character was so much like him that this strange novel seemed to contain the story of his life, even before he had lived it. The good things that had been captured in Basil's painting of Dorian captivated others as well. Even those who heard the most evil things about Dorian Gray could never believe them. He didn't look evil at all. Instead, he had the look of someone who kept himself pure. Yet Dorian began to live the life written about in Lord Henry's book. And it was so easy. He was rich. His handsome features captivated everyone who met him. He knew joy and cruelty. He could have whatever he wanted. Strange tales began circulating around London about him. He still looked pure, but was he? Dorian would disappear on long, mysterious absence. Afterwards he would creep upstairs to the locked room and stand in front of the portrait that Basil had painted. There he would look at the evil, ugly, aging face on the canvas. He grew more and more taken with its own looks, and more interested in the corruption of his own soul. No one knew where he went. No one knew about the sordid room in the nasty tavern near the docks. Traveling in disguise and under an assumed name, Dorian Gray would frequent this awful place. All the sins he had read about in the little yellow book became real to him. With wild abandon, Dorian Gray fed his mad hunger for adventure and destruction. He indulged his every mood, every whim, every want. He minded the deep mysteries of all the senses. At the same time, Dorian was known as a man about town. He was famous for dressing well. He was rich, and indulged his every whim. He began to collect musical instruments, expensive jewels, and beautiful works of art. He had a house in London and a huge estate in the country. He spent his money recklessly, but all these treasures, everything he collected, were just a means of escape. Hanging on the walls of the lonely, locked room where he had spent his childhood, he had hung the terrible portrait, whose constantly changing features showed him the real degradation of his life. He had draped the purple and gold Italian curtain over it to hide it from view. For weeks he would not go to the locked room, and he'd forget the hideous painting. For a time he would enjoy a light-hearted and joyous existence. Then suddenly at night he would creep out of the house and go to the dreadful place near Blue Gate Fields and stay, day after day, until he was driven away. On his return, he would sit in front of the picture, sometimes hating it and himself. After a few years, he could not bear to be parted from the painting. For long periods of time, he gave up the villa he had shared with Lord Henry in Italy, and the little white house in Algiers, where they would spend the winter. Dorian Gray worried about the painting that was now such a part of his life. What if it was stolen? Or what if, while he was away, someone gained access to the room in spite of the bars and learned his secret? The very thought terrified him. What if the world already suspected? After all, there were people who distrusted him. He was nearly blackballed at a West End club. Once he was brought by a friend into this London club. The Duke of Barwick and another gentleman got up and left. By his 25th birthday, wild stories were again circulating in polite society. It was said that Dorian Gray had been seen fighting with foreign sailors, that he kept company with thieves and other criminals. Women who had adored him now shunned him. Respectable men would leave the room if he entered their club. What had happened to the once innocent boy? Only Dorian Gray knew the answer. He had been poisoned by Lord Henry's book. To him, evil was now beautiful. Chapter 13. Basil tries to save his friend. 13 years later, on the 9th of November, on the eve of his 38th birthday, Dorian was walking home. He had dined at Lord Henry's, and the night was cold and foggy. At the corner he passed a man with a bag in his hand. Dorian recognized Basil Hallward. A strange sense of fear, which he did not understand, came over him. He did not want to speak to Basil, so he pretended not to recognize him. Dorian walked quickly in the direction of his house, but he had spotted Dorian and placed his hand on his arm. "Dorian, I have been waiting for you in your library. I'm off to Paris by the midnight train. I've been gone for 6 months. I wanted to speak to you before I left. I thought it was you, but I wasn't sure." "Didn't you recognize me?" "In this fog, Basil? Why, I can't even recognize Grosvenor Square. I'm sorry that you are going away. I haven't seen you for ages." "Here we are," said Basil. "I really must speak to you. It is most important." "All right. You'd better come in," said the weary Dorian. Basil followed Dorian into the library. There was a bright wood fire blazing in the large open hearth. Brandy and soda stood on the table nearby. "I can't wait any longer, Dorian. There's something I must say to you," Basil stated. "What do you want to talk about, Basil?" asked Dorian. "I'm very tired and I want to go to bed." "It's about you. I think you should know that the most terrible things are being said against you in London. Your reputation is in ruins," said Basil sadly. I don't care what people gossip about, replied Dorian, and he sighed. I only care about other people's scandals. You must care, Dorian. Of course, I don't believe the horrible things people say. I think sin is something that writes itself across a man's face. It cannot be hidden. You look as young and pure as you did when we first met. Yet I see you very seldom, he continued, and I hear such hideous things. Why do so many gentlemen refuse to go to your house or invite you to theirs? Why is your friendship so fatal to other people? Basil ticked off a list of prominent men who had been ruined by Dorian Gray. He mentioned a young royal son who had taken his life in the navy, Lord Kent's son who married a woman of low degree, and a scandal of Adrian Singleton who had been convicted of forgery. All of them had once been close friends of Dorian Gray. And that's not all, added Basil miserably. It said that you have been seen creeping out of dreadful houses at dawn and sneaking in disguise into the full-set dens near the wharf. Can such rumors be true? Don't you care about your reputation? Dorian shrugged. He seemed completely indifferent to Basil's words. He acted as if he did not care about the terrible stories that were circulating. I wonder, mused Basil, if I really do know you. Before I answer, I'd have to see your soul. My soul, muttered Dorian Gray, jumping up from the sofa and turning almost white with fear. Fair enough. You shall see my soul for yourself tonight. Follow me. It is your handiwork. Why shouldn't you look at it? You have chattered enough about corruption and disgrace. Now you shall see it face to face. Basil became frightened. His friend seemed so reckless. Dorian Gray sneered at Basil with contempt. Come upstairs, Basil, he said quietly. I keep a diary of my life. See for yourself. There was a madness of pride in every word Dorian spoke. He stamped his foot on the ground in a boyish manner. He felt a terrible joy at someone else sharing his secret. The man who had painted the portrait was about to be burdened for the rest of his life with the hideous memory of what he had done. Chapter 14. The Truth is Revealed. They walked silently up the locked studio. The lamp cast fantastic shadows on the wall and staircase. A rising wind made the windows rattle. You insist on knowing, Basil? Dorian asked in a low voice. Yes, he replied with certainty. Shut the door behind you, Dorian commanded. You are the one man in the world who is entitled to know everything about me. You have had more to do with my life than you think. Basil glanced around the room with a puzzled expression. It looked as if it had not been lived in for years. A faded tapestry, a curtained picture, an almost empty bookcase, a table and chair. That was all it contained. As Dorian was lighting a half-burned candle, he saw the whole place was covered with dust, and the carpet was full of holes. So you think it's only God who sees the soul, Basil? Draw that curtain back, and you will see mine, he said in a voice that was cold and cruel. You're sounding crazy, Dorian, Basil said, seized by a sudden fear. I will do it myself, said the angry man. He tore the curtain from its rod and flung it to the ground. An exclamation of terror broke from Basil's lips. He saw in the dim light a hideous face on the canvas. It grinned wickedly at him. Something in the expression filled him with disgust and hatred. Good heavens, it was Dorian Gray's own face. The horror had not entirely spoiled the beauty. There was still some gold in the thinning hair, and some red on the handsome mouth. The sunken eyes were still blue. Yes, it was Dorian Gray, but who had done it? He seemed to recognize his own brushwork. The frame was his design. The idea was monstrous, and he was gripped by fear. He seized the lighted candle and held it to the picture. In the left-hand corner was his own name, traced in long letters of bright red. His own picture. What did it mean? Why had it changed? And how had it done so? "What does it mean?" cried Basil, frightened by what he had seen. He turned and looked at Dorian Gray with eyes of a sick man. His mouth and hands twitched, and he was unable to speak. He passed his hand across his forehead. It was covered in sweat. Dorian spoke. "Years ago, when I was a boy, you painted a portrait of me. You flattered me and taught me to be vain about my looks. One day you introduced me to Lord Henry, who told me the only thing of value was beauty. Your portrait of me made me think I was handsome," said Dorian, and he clenched his fist. "I didn't want to lose my good looks. In a mad moment, I made a wish. Perhaps you remember it." "I remember it. But it's impossible." "What is impossible?" murmured Dorian, pointing to the horrifying painting. "This is my soul." "You once told me you had destroyed my painting," said Basil. "I was wrong," said Dorian. "It has destroyed me." "You were such an ideal to me," Basil said, shaking his head in wonder. "This hideous painting has the eyes of a devil. If it's true, if this is what you've done to your life, you must be worse than people say." Basil shuddered. "The horror in the painting is from within. That is from where the fullness has come." Chapter 15. A Murder is Committed. Basil flung himself into the rickety chair that was standing by the table and buried his face in his hands. Dorian was sobbing at the window. "What a lesson, Dorian! What an awful lesson! Pray, Dorian, pray," instructed Basil. "What are we taught in boyhood? Forgive us our sin. Let us pray together. The prayer of your pride was answered. The prayer of your repentance would also be answered. I admired your beauty too much. We were both punished." "It is too late, Basil," Dorian faltered. "It is never too late, Dorian. Let us kneel down. You have done enough evil in your life. Don't you see that accursed painting leering at us?" Dorian Gray glanced at the picture and suddenly felt an uncontrollable feeling of hatred for Basil Hallward. The mad passion of a cornered animal stirred within him. He hated the man seated at the table more than he had ever hated anything in his whole life. He glanced wildly around. His eyes fell on a knife that was laying on the top of a chest. He moved slowly towards it, passing Basil. As soon as he got behind him, he seized the knife. Dorian quietly turned around and plunged the knife behind Basil's ear, crushing the man's head down on the table, and stabbing him again and again. There was a stifled groan and the wretched sound of someone choking with blood. Basil's arm shot up and grabbed at the air. Dorian stabbed him twice more. As the blood began dripping to the floor, Basil did not move. Then Dorian threw the knife on the table and listened. Silence. He could hear nothing but the dripping of blood on the threadbare carpet. He opened the door and went out on the landing. He peered over the railing into the black, seething well of darkness. The house was absolutely quiet. Then he took out the key and returned to the room, locking himself in. How quickly it had been done! Dorian Gray felt strangely calm, and walking over to the window, opened it, and stepped out on the balcony. The wind had blown the fog away, and the sky was like a peacock's tail, starred with rows of golden eyes. He looked down and saw the policeman making his rounds, flashing the long beam of his lantern on the doors of the silent houses. A woman in a fluttering shawl was staggering along. A bitter blast of wind swept across the square. The gas lamps flickered and became blue, and the leafless trees shook their branches back and forth. Dorian shivered and closed the window. He felt haunted and longed to escape from this room of death and decay. There was no time to delay. He must leave the room at once. He did not glance at the murdered man. The friend who had painted the fatal portrait had gone out of his life. That was enough. Dorian locked the door behind him and crept quietly downstairs. He saw Basil's coat and bag. He hid them away and began to think. What evidence was there against him? Basil had left the house at 11. No one had seen him come in again. Most of the servants were at his country estate. Basil was scheduled to go to Paris by the midnight train. It would be months before his absence aroused suspicion. Months! All the evidence could be destroyed by then. A sudden thought struck him. He needed an alibi. He put on his coat and hat and went outside. After a few moments he rang the bell. In 5 minutes his valet, looking very drowsy, answered the door. "I'm sorry to wake you up, Francis," he said, "but I've forgotten my key. Did anyone call for me this evening?" "Mr. Howard, sir. But he left at 11 to catch his train." "Oh, I'm sorry I missed him. Did he leave any message?" asked Dorian slyly. "No, sir, except that he would write to you from Paris." "Thank you. That will be all, Francis. Call me at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Good night." We will continue this story next Friday or Saturday. Thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.